Every single day, 1/5 of the world's oil passes through a corridor so narrow, a single miscalculation could collapse the global economy within hours. And most people have never even heard its name. The Strait of Hormuz. 39 kilometers wide at its thinnest point, water so shallow in places that supertankers must follow precise lanes, separated by just a few nautical miles. One lane in, one lane out, no room for error, no alternative route. This is the choke point the world pretends doesn't exist. From above, the waters appear almost peaceful, a sliver of blue squeezed between Iran to the north and the jagged coastline of Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. The Persian Gulf opens wide behind it, the Gulf of Oman stretches ahead, and between them, this fragile passage carries more energy than any other waterway on Earth. 21 million barrels of crude every single day. But here's what most people don't realize. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It is a pressure point, a fault line, a place where geography, politics, and survival collide in ways the modern world refuses to acknowledge. Stand at the edge of the Iranian coastline and look south. The tankers move slowly, deliberately, like giants holding their breath. Their hulls sit low in the water, heavy with oil bound for China, Japan, South Korea, India, Europe. The global machine depends on this rhythm, and the rhythm depends on silence. But silence here is always temporary. Zoom closer, past the supertankers, past the naval vessels that shadow them, past the fishing boats that have worked these waters for centuries, and you begin to see something else. An island, small, almost forgotten. Hormuz Island. This is where the strait gets its name, and this is where the story begins to feel strange. The island is red, not metaphorically, literally red. Its soil, its cliffs, its beaches, a deep iron-rich crimson that looks like the land itself is bleeding. Locals have harvested this soil for generations, using it for dye, for spice, for medicine. Some believe the redness holds power, others say it's a warning. And perhaps it is, because Hormuz Island has watched empires rise and fall for over 5,000 years. The Portuguese built a fortress here in the 16th century, desperate to control the trade routes. Before them, the Persians. Before them, ancient merchants whose names history has forgotten. Everyone who ever wanted to dominate this region understood one truth: control the strait, control everything. But that's only the beginning, because what's happening in these waters right now is something the ancient empires could never have imagined. The tension here isn't just historical, it's accelerating, and the world isn't paying attention. Not yet. The water here holds secrets most maps refuse to show. Beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, the seafloor drops and rises unpredictably. Underwater ridges, shallow banks, sudden depths that plunge beyond 200 meters. This is not a simple passage. It is a maze disguised as open water, and the tankers must navigate it perfectly. From the deck of a supertanker, the strait feels impossibly crowded. Radar screens flicker with dozens of vessels, cargo ships, oil tankers, liquefied natural gas carriers, military frigates, fishing dhows, all threading through the same narrow corridor, all following invisible lanes drawn by international agreement. 2 miles wide for inbound traffic, 2 miles wide for outbound, a 2-mile buffer zone between them, 6 miles of navigable water, carrying the lifeblood of industrial civilization. One wrong turn, one engine failure, one act of aggression, and the lanes collapse. But the danger here isn't just human. The currents of the strait are violent and unpredictable. Water from the Persian Gulf flows outward near the surface, pushed by evaporation and density. Beneath it, cooler water from the Gulf of Oman surges inward, creating a constant churn. Ships fight against these invisible forces every hour of every day. Captains know the strait demands respect. The sea here does not forgive mistakes. At dawn, the light hits the water at an angle that makes everything glow. The Iranian mountains rise in the distance, brown and hazy. The air smells of salt and diesel, and the silence between radio transmissions feels heavier than it should. This is a place where calm is never quite calm. Fishermen from Oman still cast their nets in these waters, just as their grandfathers did. They know the rhythms of the tides, the patterns of the fish, the moods of the wind. But they also know something has changed. The warships are more frequent now. The helicopters louder. The tension thicker. They don't speak about it often, but they feel it. And then there are the islands, scattered across the strait like fragments of a broken world. Some belong to Iran, some to Oman, some to the Way, and some are contested, their ownership disputed for decades. These tiny land masses may look insignificant from a distance, but their positions are everything. Greater Tunbi, Lesser Tunbi, Abu Musa. Iran seized them in 1971, just as the British were withdrawing from the region. The Way still claims them. The dispute has never been resolved. And in a choke point, this critical, unresolved disputes don't stay quiet forever. Zoom out, and the geography becomes even more unsettling. The Persian Gulf itself is shallow, rarely deeper than 90 meters, a semi-enclosed sea surrounded by some of the most oil-rich nations on Earth: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, the Way, Iran, all of them dependent on this single exit point. There is no other way out. Pipelines exist, yes, small alternatives that bypass the strait, but they carry a fraction of the volume. If the Strait of Hormuz closes, even for a week, the shock would ripple across every continent. Fuel prices would spike. Stock markets would tremble. Supply chains would fracture. The world built its energy infrastructure on an assumption that this passage would always remain open. But assumptions are not guarantees. And something here feels increasingly fragile. The water keeps moving. The tankers keep passing. The sun sets behind the Iranian peaks, casting long shadows across the strait. And in the growing darkness, the lights of 100 ships blink on, one by one, like a nervous heartbeat. What happens next is something few are prepared to consider. Survival here has always demanded adaptation. Long before the first oil tanker ever entered these waters, people learned to live at the edge of extremes. The coastlines surrounding the strait are not gentle. Summer temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Humidity clings to the skin like a second layer. Fresh water is scarce. The land offers little. And yet, for thousands of years, humans refuse to leave. The fishermen of Hormuz Island still remember the old ways. Their fathers taught them to read the currents, to predict the arrival of kingfish and hammer by the color of the sky at dusk. They built wooden dhows by hand, using techniques passed down for generations. No blueprints, no factory parts, just knowledge carried in memory. But the sea is changing. Overfishing has depleted stocks that once seemed endless. Warmer waters have pushed species into deeper, cooler zones. The fishermen must travel farther, stay out longer, burn more fuel for smaller catches. Some have abandoned the trade entirely. Others hold on, stubborn, unwilling to surrender a way of life that defines who they are. It's not just the fish that are disappearing. The coral reefs of the Persian Gulf were once among the most resilient on Earth, adapted to extreme heat, capable of surviving salinity levels that would kill reefs elsewhere. Scientists believe they might be be the last corals standing as climate change ravaged tropical ecosystems. They were wrong. In recent years, mass bleaching events have struck even these hardy survivors. The water has grown too warm, too fast. What took centuries to build now dies in weeks. And with the coral go the species that depend on it. The crabs, the small fish, the delicate balance that sustains larger predators. The ecosystem is unraveling, quietly, invisibly, while the world watches the tankers pass. But nature is not the only force struggling to adapt. Humans on both sides of the strait have spent decades preparing for conflict that never quite arrives. Iran has built an asymmetric military strategy designed specifically for these waters. Fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles hidden in coastal mountains, submarine capabilities that grow more sophisticated each year. The logic is simple. If Iran cannot match the naval power of its adversaries, it can make the cost of confrontation unbearable. Across the water, the United States maintains a constant presence. The Fifth Fleet operates from Bahrain, just hours from the strait. Aircraft carriers rotate through. Destroyers patrol. Surveillance never stops. Both sides understand the stakes, both sides prepare, and both sides hope deterrence will hold. But deterrence is a theory, not a promise. The incidents accumulate like pressure in a sealed chamber. Tankers seized, drones shot down, mines discovered floating near shipping lanes. Each event stops short of war. Each event raises the threshold slightly higher. Fishermen watch the warships pass and say nothing. They have seen this before. The British, the Americans, the Iranians, powers come and go. The strait remains. But something feels different now. The old fishermen speak of a time when the water felt abundant, when the catch was so heavy their boats sat low returning to shore, when conflict was a distant rumor, not a daily reality. Their grandchildren listen, but they cannot imagine that world. They know only this one. The patrols, the helicopters, the tankers that never stop moving, the heat that grows worse each year. Adaptation is no longer a choice here. It is the only way to survive. And survival, as this place is always known, is never guaranteed. Identity here is layered like sediment, compressed by time, shaped by forces most outsiders never see. The people who live along the Strait of Hormuz do not define themselves by the geopolitics that consume headlines. They define themselves by older things, by the rhythm of tides, by the call to prayer echoing across harbors at dawn, by the taste of saffron in rice cooked the way their grandmothers taught. But the world keeps intruding. On Hormuz Island, the red soil has become something unexpected, an attraction. Artists from Tehran have traveled here in recent years, drawn by the surreal landscape. They paint murals on abandoned buildings. They photograph the crimson beaches against turquoise water. They call it magical, otherworldly. The locals watch with quiet amusement. For them, this soil is not art, it is life. They mix it into spice blends sold in small jars. They use it to cure fish. They believe it holds medicinal properties, healing ailments that modern medicine cannot name. The redness is not a spectacle to them. It is inheritance. And inheritance here carries weight. Across the water on the Iranian mainland, the port city of Bandar Abbas sprawls in the heat. Cranes lift containers from ships. Trucks idle in endless lines. The city moves to the rhythm of commerce, a heartbeat synchronized with global demand. But walk away from the port, into the older neighborhoods, and the rhythm changes. Here, elderly men sit in tea houses, speaking in dialects that younger generations barely understand. They remember when Bandar Abbas was smaller, quieter, when the strait was a place of fishing, not a flashpoint for superpowers. They speak of the Persian Empire not as history, but as presence, a continuity that flows through their blood. Iran's relationship with the strait is not merely strategic, it is existential. For centuries, Persia was a land power. Mountains protected it, deserts isolated it, the sea was secondary. But the discovery of oil changed everything. Suddenly, the Persian Gulf became the center of the world's attention, and the strait became the gate through which Iran's wealth must flow. Control the gate, and Iran has leverage. Lose it, and Iran becomes vulnerable. This is not propaganda. This is geography. And geography here is inseparable from belief. In the villages along the Iranian coast, shrines dot the hillsides. Small structures painted green and white, honoring saints whose names are whispered in prayer. Fishermen visit before setting out. Mothers bring children to ask for blessings. The faith here is not abstract, it is woven into daily survival. But faith exists on the other side too. In Oman, the Abadi tradition of Islam has shaped a culture distinct from its neighbors. Moderate, tolerant, quietly proud. Oman has positioned itself as a neutral mediator, a nation that speaks to all sides without fully joining any. This diplomacy is not accidental. It is survival strategy perfected over generations. The Sultanate understands something crucial. In a region where alliances shift and conflicts erupt without warning, neutrality is a form of power. Oman cannot control the strait by force, but it can control something equally valuable: trust. And trust in these waters is the rarest currency. The way approaches the strait differently. Dubai and Abu Dhabi have built empires of commerce, transforming desert coastlines into global hubs. Their wealth flows through the strait every hour. Their vulnerability is absolute. They do not speak of this vulnerability publicly, but they prepare for it constantly. Desalination plants, strategic reserves, diplomatic relationships cultivated with every major power. The UA hedges its bets because it has no choice. The strait is both the source of its prosperity and the single greatest threat to its existence. Past and present collide here without resolution. The ancient traders who sailed these waters sought spices, pearls, textiles. The modern tankers carry crude oil and liquefied gas. The cargo has changed. The stakes have multiplied 1,000-fold. But the fundamental truth remains. Whoever controls passage through these waters holds power over those who depend on it. And almost everyone depends on it. And so we return to the question that has lingered from the beginning. What happens when the world's most critical passage can no longer be taken for granted? The Strait of Hormuz has functioned for decades on a fragile consensus. All parties benefit from its openness. Therefore, all parties tolerate each other's presence. Warships shadow tankers. Diplomats issue warnings. Incidents flare and then subside. The oil keeps flowing. The global economy keeps breathing. But consensus is not permanent. It is negotiated. Daily. Silently. Through calculations made in capitals thousands of miles away. And the calculations are shifting. Energy markets are evolving. The West speaks of transition. Solar panels, electric vehicles, reduced dependence on fossil fuels. Some analysts predict the strait will matter less in 30 years, perhaps 50. They draw charts showing declining relevance. But charts do not account for chaos. China's thirst for oil grows larger each year. India's consumption accelerates. Southeast Asia industrializes. The demand does not disappear. It relocates. And for these rising economies, the Strait of Hormuz remains what it has always been: everything. Meanwhile, the tensions multiply. Iran's economy staggers under sanctions. Its government faces pressure from within and without. The temptation to use the strait as leverage grows stronger when other options vanish. A threat to close the passage, a mine placed in darkness, a tanker seized as bargaining chip. These are not hypotheticals. They have already happened, and each time the world held its breath, waited, hoped the escalation would stop. It did, so far. But hope is not a strategy, and the margin for error shrinks with every passing year. Stand on Hormuz Island at sunset, and the contradictions become visible. The red soil glows like something alive. The water shifts from blue to gold to black. Tankers move on the horizon, their lights blinking into existence as darkness falls. Somewhere, a fisherman pulls his boat onto the beach, his catch meager, his silence heavy. He does not think about geopolitics. He thinks about tomorrow, about whether the fish will return, about whether his son will inherit this life or abandon it for the cities. But his fate and the fate of the world are connected by these waters. This is what most people fail to understand. The Strait of Hormuz is not an abstraction. It is not a line on a map studied by analysts in air-conditioned rooms. It is a living place, a place where families have fished for generations, where empires have risen and crumbled, where the modern world's deepest dependency flows through a corridor barely wider than a large city. And it is vulnerable, not because of any single threat, but because of the accumulation. Climate change, military tension, economic desperation, resource depletion. Each pressure adds weight. The system holds until it doesn't. The ancient Persians believed the sea was sacred, a boundary between worlds, a place where human ambition met forces beyond control. Perhaps they understood something we have forgotten. We have built a civilization that depends on the uninterrupted flow of energy through a passage we cannot fully secure. We have bet everything on stability in a region defined by instability. We have assumed the strait will always remain open because it always has, but history does not repeat. It rhymes, and the rhythm here is growing louder. The water still moves, the tankers still pass, the sun still sets behind the mountains of Iran, casting long shadows across the narrowest point on earth. And the world keeps watching, waiting, hoping that the silence will hold. But silence in the Strait of Hormuz has never lasted forever. Some places exist at the edge of everything, where pressure builds without release, where the next moment is never guaranteed. This is one of those places, and the world depends on it more than it dares to admit.